I'm going to talk about. It's a bit more light-hearted, I hope, than the rather impressive presentation by Things Live. I will also draw on my experience, then more the experience of a risk professional, safety professional, and just share some reflections with you. And I'm not going to promise to offer any solutions. If anything, I hope that I will make you a bit critical and make you think. And I think that's very important, because the way how we think about risk determines to a certain degree how we handle risk. And, well, it's maybe a good thing to think a bit differently. Let me start by sharing a little story, something that happened last year. My department, we had a little field trip. We visited one of the many stations around the country. And we had a presentation of the station chief, the local police chief. And he told us at length how they worked. How he cooperated with the bars, the restaurants, how he planned his people when they needed them most, in the weekend, at special occasions, etc., etc. And after the locals had done some presentations, it was question time, and the central staff that was visiting them, we got some questions. And as you may know, there was a big reorganization in Norwegian police going on. And they asked us, how do you handle it? The station chief, after I was finished, he said, "Oh my God, I'm so happy that I don't work with risk. That I don't have to deal with this complicated stuff." And I said to him, "Dear friend, you've told us 45 minutes without any break about how you deal with risk. You haven't used the word. But this is what risk management is all about." He was pretty impressed by himself. And I think that's risk phobia. People heard the word risk and they kind of black out, they shut down. Risk, scary stuff. By the way, the font should have been much scarier. This is a very friendly font. But when you talk about when you talk about risk in normal life, we talk about scary stuff, we talk about things going wrong, about accidents that are going to happen, could happen, about people getting injured or maimed or a lot of loss. But is that really necessary? Is risk necessarily bad? Very everyday example, we just did it. If you order a coffee at a kiosk or a restaurant and you get these paper cups, you tend to get them with a warning. Caution, content may be hot. And we can say a lot about this. Firstly, I'd like to criticize them for their lack of imagination. People say the biggest barrier in risk assessment is your lack of imagination. It's a great example for it, I think. Because why don't they write on it, caution, this may cause your heartbeat to race, may cause blood pressure, may cause your shirt to be ruined if you spill it, etc., etc. So it's a bit limited. Secondly, and this is the real criticism, may be hot? Come on, I ordered coffee. If you go to McDonald's or the Norwegian or whatever, and you get a really lukewarm or cold cup of coffee, do you go to the counter and say, "Thank you, this was the safest thing I ever got from you. Bless you"? No. They're going to complain, and complain quite loudly, I think. So, this is a bit silly example, of course, but I think it's very telling. Bit silly example, of course, but I think it's very telling. I like this one much better. And we have this perception, risk, it's only negative. And because we have this view, it colors how we look at things when they happen. When I look at the positive side, why do we take this risk? Yeah, because I need coffee to get going in the morning. Because I need a little kick in a meeting, or whatever the reason is. Because I like it and I enjoy it. It explains why people do things. People don't necessarily do things because they're stupid or reckless or silly. They make choices because of a goal they have. And it's often hidden in the positive side of the risk they take. So when we think about the positive side, about what we do. Take this one, for example. I got this from a friend. And it's taken from an safety observation course. It's one of those typical PowerPoint courses. And the question accompanied with this particular picture was, why on earth would he do that? And he is, of course, he. The guy up there on the railing. Who in his right mind would do that? It's in the speaker notes under the slide, if you see the original version. And there was also, why doesn't he use the scaffold? And I think, well, that's not so difficult, I think. I don't say that this is the best way of working, but if you have a job, you have only one scaffold, you have work all over the place here, you get probably someone has said, there's a little spot there, fix it. He's not going to take down this scaffold, fight with these two guys who is going to have the scaffold, move it, build it again, spend an hour on a little spot. He's not going to do that. Nobody's going to do that. So he takes this risk. And one message I would like you to take home with you is this question. Don't ask why in the world was he so stupid, but why does it make sense to him? An answer to this question will probably give you much, much greater gain in risk management and safety than asking why, how could he be so stupid? And this can also help us to make it not a people problem, but a system problem. Then we have here the next subject I'd like to talk about, which I've called risk fatigue. Is it familiar? When I started as a young safety professional in a workshop in the Netherlands, there was this one department. When I entered, I would make regular rounds, try to be on the work floor once, twice a day at least. And there was this one department, when I came in, the supervisor, he would roll his eyes. And a clear expression of, oh, what in the world have we done wrong now? What does he want? We turned that together. But that's this. And I think we get a lot of this. Because we have to risk assess absolutely everything. Quality, safety, safety, other kinds of safety, etc., etc. By regulation, by management system, some by common sense, and people really get fed up. I think that was one of the effects, also the station chief. He would get these directives, you have to do a risk assessment before every operation you do. You have to do one because of the arbeidszinsbestemmelser, which I just forgot what the English word is, etc., etc. So, people are just overloaded by risk assessment. And of course, sometimes we do have to split them up because it makes it easier to analyze. But there's another important lesson I want you to take home. The sum of the parts is not the same as the whole. Often it isn't. And Sigve, I think you said something about the whole. Management sees the whole. Risk assessors see a little part. That's a very important message. And here are some other factors that contribute to this fatigue, I think. We have to do stuff because the procedure says so. But people don't really feel that it adds anything. It's a paper exercise. I think you can fill in with examples from your own companies. I had a quite interesting experience last week when I had a meeting with people from our PU, the people who work with the foreigners and get them on the plane back to scary countries. And one of the most experienced agents there, he said to me, well, I have to do this risk matrix. I have to fill in some things that can go wrong, a sign, a consequence, and a probability, and get some number, and the system gives me a color, and then I have to point out some actions. And I do it because I can't travel if I don't. But this paper doesn't give me any value. And that was a guy who, in the same speech, told me about, well, he had been to Mogadishu, a place where we weren't supposed to stay at night. We had to take the first plane back, but what if the plane malfunctions? And you don't have a choice but to stay there. What people do you call? What organization can help you from the hotel to the hotel and back? By the way, what phone is working? How do you know that you have the right phone? Phone is working. How do you know that you have the right phone? Etc., etc. And this guy, by the way, he had experienced that scenario and he used it to test out the emergency situations. If they worked, how they worked, risking his own life. And he would tell his people, if you get in a plane, there's a shooting, this is what you do. Because chairs only stop bullets in Hollywood movies. So on one side he said, this paper stuff that we're doing, it doesn't help me. On the other side, he is crammed with competence. And how do you get those two? Another great example that I took from a textbook, not a Norwegian one. How I think that safety or risk is not really helping people out there. Look at this calculation. It's from a scientific paper, by the way. I haven't read it, but I know it is. The risk of using a ladder, consequences none, and there is a probability once in 1 year. I read it and I thought, last year I painted the windows in the second store of my house. I used a ladder because I was too lazy to get a scaffold, and I have a quite nice ladder. And I think I went up about 15 times. Once a year. I managed 50 in a year, so I have a much higher success rate. And by the way, success is not non-consequence, but that's back to the negative. And then look at these numbers. Where on earth did they get that? But it's scientific, so it must be true. There's a one death once in 55 million years. Exceptional, but it gets even better in this textbook. Because they tell us the decision to use a ladder may be driven more by the probability of survival than by the seriousness of the most adverse consequence, death. Is this how people make decisions? Of course, the reverse is probably true. If there was a ladder and I would judge, if I'm going to use this, there's a much higher probability. I would judge, if I'm going to use this, there's a much higher probability to end up dead than to get my windows painted. I will probably not take it. But I don't use a ladder because my chance of survival is larger than not using the ladder. I use a ladder because I want my window painted. So, dear risk people, smell the real world. And that's why people think risk, that's complicated shit. There's a lot of formulas, a lot of colors, matrices, models, and you risk people, you handle it, we do the real work, you fix. Thank you. But need to be that? Sigve, he asked a very good question. How many risk experts are there in the room? And I didn't raise my hand either because I was in the back and I thought nobody's going to do that. So I didn't want to stand out, but I think we are all risk experts because we handle risk every day. Is there someone who has done a risk assessment today? Raise your hand. None. Yeah, some. I would be very interested to see if it's documented. But how many of us have driven a car today? Have chosen what to have for breakfast? Have chosen clothes? I was going to Stavanger. Maybe rain there, so I packed an umbrella. We all handle risk regularly. Of it. So risk doesn't have to be complicated at all. We fixed that. This is an actual slide which we these days use in the police to open workshops on risk. Just to get people out of this matrix and formula mode and have them to discuss risk in a totally different setting. The exercise is this. We go on a holiday with our whole family and we have to choose between 4 locations, and we run this brainstorm for about 10 minutes and then we try to summarize, and it's fantastic to see that 10 minutes of playing around with something silly like this, it gives you the whole process. Conflicting goals, boundaries in time, finance, etc., etc. Conflicting goals, boundaries in time, finance, etc., etc. Mobility, because maybe the grandfather can't travel in the desert, etc., etc. It gives you basically everything, except maybe safety, but tends to be something there. And it's a great exercise just to open up. Get people thinking, oh, we can actually do risk without all the complicated stuff. So we've been working hard to make things a lot simpler. And then you can also make things too simple. One is by blindly trusting this formula. And I was very glad to hear Sigve being a bit critical about it. Down in, I think, its worst form, because this is very specific about something bad. And this leads you very much into thinking this has to be calculated and be a known number. While it isn't. Should be consequence and likelihood, probability. It can be much less numerical. But there are some more, what shall I say, critical problems with this simple thinking of risk in those two factors. Just some highlights, and there are many more to be thought of. One is this model requires that you have excellent knowledge of the two factors. Remember, it was designed long ago. Remember, it was designed long ago for gambling, for the casino. And that's where it rather decently works, because you can calculate the odds, etc. You know the outcomes. There's not too much uncertainty there. The other thing is, it's designed for these, for events, things that happen, not things that creep over time. And these are actually some of the big problems we in the police work with. Burnout, we are exposed to, our people are exposed to tremendous stress and, well, a lot of not nice stuff. We have slowly creeping exposure to, and the simple formula does not work here. I seen people trying to use it. It gives very weird results without using this. Then there is the other thing. This formula, it does not account for your assumptions and all the stuff you take for granted. You know this ship? Seen the movie? Yeah, Leonardo DiCaprio died. That's the one. A lot of assumptions in this, both with regard to the risk management beforehand and also the emergency response. They assumed that they didn't need 100% coverage for the boat, lifeboats, because the common practice, which they assumed they would follow, was to float them to another ship or bring them on shore. Yeah. What do you do if there's not another ship and no shore, etc.? A lot of assumptions that actually were much more critical than whatever they did calculate at the time. And then, of course, we've probably experienced this. This simple risk is consequence times likelihood. It doesn't account for all the weird stuff we decide on a daily basis. Like, experts have determined nuclear power is the safest thing in the world, 10 minus something. Nobody wants these things in his backyard. Not even with the promise of really cheap electricity. On the other hand, we take this kind of risk. What's the positive effect there? What's the positive effect there? It's an adrenaline rush and 200 likes on Facebook. On the downside, if he goes downside, he is extremely dead. So, why on earth? And then, of course, this one, everybody knows, well, my chances on winning those 140, 150 million, what's it, tomorrow? Something like that. It's 1 in 98 million. Chances of dying on a ladder are probably larger. But no, we buy this lottery ticket because only the feeling, imagine what I'm going to say to my boss tomorrow, is probably worth the 50 kroner. So, we cannot explain this with a simple formula. We cannot explain this with a simple formula. It may come handy sometimes, but don't trust blindly. And then we have, of course, the graphic formula. And Jens, he is probably going to do a fantastic session at the end of the day, so I'm not going to dwell too long on this. But just some critical remarks, and this again comes from police, Økokrim. They publish each year tracked picture. And they're great reports. I can really recommend reading them because they tell a lot about security and crime, but also how we can think about risk in a really good way. But then they have this picture. And I thought, was this necessary? Very simple, how the state is and well, what risk we have. And so I look at this and I think, what conclusion do I draw from this picture? And knowing this is about economical crime in Norway, I think Norway is a scary country because we are in the red, very much so, which doesn't quite match my feeling, but the other thing, after I've, well, recovered from the shock that Norway is quite a scary country, I think this doesn't tell me anything, because here are scores, but what does the score mean, or what is it about? And by the way, what is it about? And by the way, being a nerd, why is 81 less scary than 80? So there's a lot of stuff here going on, and then luckily we get 50 pages of text, and I think this is excellent stuff. This is how I want my people to do risk assessment. They're descriptive, they're nuanced. I can understand why arbeidsmiljøkriminalitet, why it's ranked quite high. I can understand. They discuss various factors on the consequence side, various factors on the probability side, and they do something really smart with it. And then they ruin it by painting it in this picture. So, some suggestions. Answers. I will try to give some. The first I would say, and I think there were the two speakers before me said it already, create understanding. Why are we doing this? What does it add to our process? Is it just a paper to cover our butts and to get this permission to travel abroad? Or does it actually add something? And then, to make it add something and to get people to do it, make it as simple as possible. We can't do, of course, really simple things with words when you are calculating a blast wall or something. Then we need models and numbers, etc. But for many everyday, but don't dump it down to a matrix or, well, pick some numbers, fill in the formula, it gets this number, everything above 12 is scary and we have to do something about it. That's not how we should do it. It may actually add value after the fact to say everything that we've decided as high risk, we can color it red because it may communicate, but don't do the process, first the color and then the stuff. Right tools for the right purpose. Use numerical tools for the stuff they're meant for. Designing blast walls, for example. But then, can't probably calculate everything in those either. So, we heard something about the human factors earlier on. Very important. And integrate this in your very important. And integrate this in your daily business. If it's an exercise, separate it from everything else. Like this senior agent who said, well, I do it, then I shelve it, give it to my boss or the travel agency, and I do my thing and manage risk. They have to be integrated. And involve. I'm in a lucky position that I know nothing about police work, which I haven't seen on TV. And that leaves me the great opportunity to ask really, really dumb stuff to the people that actually know what they are talking about. Like this guy traveling to Mogadishu. He knows about the risk, I know about the process, and I can help him. We need that involvement. And finally, rich information. Again, don't dumb things down. Don't be satisfied with a number or a color. Make the information count, because it's much easier to communicate and well, explain why something is scary and something else isn't. Or maybe in the middle. That was what I had prepared. Thanks a lot for those who are really interested. I've written a book with lots of these funny stories. Safety is fun, I think. So,
thank you,